Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, when we last spoke, it's been a long week. I mean, it seems a long time ago. You know, one of these weeks that seem to go on forever.
They go, but pass so
They
fast.
pass so fast, but at the same time, it just seems like ancient history. You know, maybe it was, those talks at Jeddah now just seem so long ago. But in fact, they were on Tuesday, and what came out of that was this American-inspired proposal for a 30-day ceasefire. Which came together with an American commitment to lift the delivery of arms to Ukraine and to lift the delivery of intelligence to Ukraine. And with that, the Americans said, well, now it's up to Putin, and we're going to send Steve Witkoff to negotiate in Moscow with President Putin. Naturally, all the Europeans elites were clapping their hands with glee because they assumed, well, now we have wrong-footed the Russians. The ball is in Putin's court, and they all sent out this exact same tweet. The ball is in Putin's court. You know, we got him. We got it. And as we discussed it on Wednesday, I think we came to the conclusion that it's very unlikely the Russians are going to say no because that's just not the Russian style. On the other hand, the Russians are not just going to say yes to a deal that's clearly not at all in their interest.
And that's very much their style.
Exactly. So what they will do is they will politely express their interest and go back to the Americans with questions and comments and queries of their own. And that is exactly what has happened. So yesterday, President Putin appeared in a joint news conference with President uh,
Lukashenko.
Lukashenko of Belarus, and he went into some detail about his idea of this proposal. So let's just take a look at the comments that he made, and here we have the question was, how do you assess Ukraine's readiness for a ceasefire? Have you received have you already received information from the Americans, and what would be your answer? And so I said, regarding Ukraine's readiness for a ceasefire, I will, of course, say how I assess this. But first of all, I would like to begin with words of gratitude to the
Mhm.
President of the United States, Mr. Trump, for devoting so much attention to the settlement in Ukraine. So right away, and he
Right away.
continued with this tone of deep respect for President Trump.
Just to interject here, this is the opposite approach that Russia has taken towards the bellicose Europeans. So there is a really stark juxtaposition
Yes,
here.
yes. And it's not surprising because as we'll see in a bit, the Europeans are going out of their way to sabotage any possibility of any kind of an agreement. Um, and they said we all have enough of our own current affairs, but many leaders of states, and it talks about the chairman of the People's Republic of China, the Prime Minister of India, presidents of Brazil and South Africa. So that's all the BRICS, the original BRICS members. They're working on the issue, devoting a lot of time to it. And then it goes on. We are grateful to all of them for this because this activity is aimed at achieving a noble mission, the mission of ending hostilities and human losses. Second, we agree with the proposals to cease hostilities, but we proceed from the fact that this cessation should be such that it would lead to long-term peace and eliminate the initial causes of this crisis. So that is, yeah,
Which has all been said before, but he's very politely repeated himself. Okay.
exactly.
I think it's very instructive, George, that in answering, out of the gate here, these questions, he included the global South, which I think is very important to Russia's positioning and dealing with the West, because it's doing it not just as a sovereign country, but as a growing bloc of countries that have mutual interests, or at least mutual approaches in how to solve problems. I think it's very important.
Right, right. But I think that's the importance is, yeah, 30-day ceasefire. Yeah, but during this 30 days, we got to be moving towards some kind of a settlement. It's not just going to be 30 days, whiling away the hours and trying to gain some unilateral advantages. So we actually have to be negotiating seriously, and that would involve addressing the initial causes of this crisis, which is you can't ignore that. Now, regarding Ukraine's readiness to cease hostilities, the American-Ukrainian meeting in Saudi Arabia may outwardly look like a decision made by the Ukrainian side under American pressure. In fact, I'm absolutely convinced that the Ukrainian side should have asked the Americans for this in the most insistent manner, based on the situation that is developing, as was just said here on the ground. I think what he means is it's the Ukrainians who need the break. I mean, it's not the Americans who need the break. It's the Ukrainians that need this break. And how is it going? Surely many have noticed. Seen that yesterday, I was in the Kursk region and listened to reports from the Chief of the General Staff, the commander of the North Group Deputy, regarding the situation in the border area, primarily in the Kursk region, or rather in the zone of penetration in the Kursk region. What's happening there? The situation there is completely under our control, and the group that invaded our territory is isolated. This is complete isolation and complete fire control. And then control of the Ukrainian troops inside this invasion zone has been lost. And if at the first stages, literally a week or two, Ukrainian servicemen tried to leave there in small groups, now this is impossible. They are trying to leave there in very small groups, 2 or 3 people, because everything is under our complete fire control. And then the equipment has been completely abandoned. It's impossible to remove it. It will remain there. This is already guaranteed. And if a physical blockade occurs in the coming days, then no one will be able to leave at all. There will only be 2 options: surrender or die. And in these conditions, it seems to me it would be very good for the Ukrainian side to achieve a ceasefire for at least 30 days. And we are for it, but there are nuances. What are they? So it's basically saying here, the Kursk, we're not going to agree to a 30-day ceasefire as applies to Kursk. But basically just because, hey, yeah, of course, that's what they would love to do, have a 30-day ceasefire to spare their forces in Kursk. So anyway, so we are for it, but what are they? First, what are we going to do with this section of the penetration into the Kursk region? If we stop military action for 30 days, what does that mean? That everyone who is there will leave without a fight? Should we let them out of there after they have committed a lot of crimes against civilians? Or will the Ukrainian leadership give them the order to lay down their arms and simply surrender? How will that happen? It sounds to me like he wants them to surrender. I mean, it's like, because he's saying, should we let them out of there after they have committed a lot of crimes against civilians? So he's not really, it doesn't sound like he's just going to allow them to retreat. And even if they just leave their equipment and their arms and everything behind.
Well, I mean, again,
it doesn't sound like he wants to just let them go.
Well, I mean, why would, because we spoke about this earlier. If there has been the resumption of military aid and intelligence, then why would the Russians agree to that? Now, if there weren't a resumption of that, and part of the 30-day ceasefire would be allow those troops, the ones that identifiably have not committed a war crime. The Russians have enormous intelligence over their own land. They can see what's going on. Then that could be that actually would be a goodwill gesture. But there has been a resumption of arms and intelligence. So why should Russia be magnanimous on this?
Right. No, I think that's right. And then it's unclear. And how will other issues be resolved along the entire contact lines? And that is almost 2,000 kilometers. And there, as you know, Russian troops are advancing in almost all areas of combat contact, and there too conditions are being created for us to block entire, fairly large units. So how will these 30 days be used? To continue forced mobilization in Ukraine, to supply weapons there, so that's to supply weapons there, to train newly mobilized units, or will none of this be done? And then the question arises, how will the issues of control and verification be resolved? How can we and how will we be guaranteed that nothing like this will happen? How will control be organized? I hope that at the level of common sense, this is clear to everyone. These are all serious questions. Who will give orders to cease hostilities? And what is the price of these orders? Can you imagine almost 2,000 kilometers? Who will determine where and who violated a possible agreement on a ceasefire over a distance of 2,000 kilometers? And then who will blame whom for the violation of this agreement? These are all questions that require painstaking research from both sides. Therefore, the idea itself is correct, and we certainly support it, but there are questions that we must discuss. I think that we need to talk to our American colleagues and partners about this, maybe call President Trump and discuss it together. American colleagues and partners, that is as warm as a reference to Americans as you've ever heard. They sometimes say our American colleagues, they sometimes say American partners, but I've never heard them saying both colleagues and partners.
Well, and who's missing? The Ukrainians are missing
The
from all of
Ukrainians
it.
are missing and the Europeans are missing.
Right.
But maybe call President Trump and discuss it together. So that's going to be an interesting to see. I mean, that's possible that there's going to be a conversation between the two of them this weekend.
Look at this. Look how the argument. Look at how the presentation is constructed. I'm going to use my word. In principle, we agree with a ceasefire, and then we end. But we support the idea of ending this conflict by
By
peaceful
peaceful
means.
means, yeah.
This is statecraft,
Right,
everyone.
right, right.
Okay, George, when you were reading that, consider all the bluster that we've heard in the Western world over the last 3 years. Has anyone ever gone point by
Right,
point
right.
in very simple, easily to understand, not without, the bluster and bombast, unprovoked, full-scale invasion. Again,
Right,
we can go on and on.
right, right.
This is like, well, we like the idea, we got a checklist, and I'm going to present it to you.
That's right. That's
Just passionately.
right, right. But the point is that everything he's saying here is reasonable. It's like, the point is that they didn't say no to Trump. They're very respectful to Trump. And it's also significant, he hasn't gone back to, at this stage, remember in June 2024, he said these are the conditions for a ceasefire: complete withdrawal of Ukrainian forces from the four oblasts and a commitment to never joining NATO. He hasn't gone back to that, so that's not what he's saying here. He said, "Yeah, I'm in favor of a ceasefire, but these and these things have to be addressed. Otherwise, we're not going there." So that's a significant. He's not saying, "Well, I already laid it down. What I said were the conditions for a ceasefire, so that's it. No discussion."
Well, I mean, what's really interesting here, going back to, Marco Rubio, he's the first to say it and everybody copied him. The ball is in Russia's court. And then, of course, the Europeans parroted it. And so very gracefully and straightforwardly, the Russians say, yes, in principle, we agreed to a 30-day ceasefire. We have our concerns. Now the ball is in your court.
No, absolutely. I think that's the key. The ball is now in your court. It's not in, you lobbed the ball into our court. We lobbed it back into your court. So that's exactly right.
And George is right. All of these are eminently
Right.
reasonable. There's
Right.
nothing unreasonable here.
Right. No, that's exactly right. So if he does talk to Trump on the phone, he's going to say, well, you can't really expect us to have a ceasefire while you're pouring arms into Ukraine. I mean, how is that in any way a reasonable common sense? Notice again, he uses common sense, knowing that's the way Trump talks. Trump talks about common sense, or says, "Oh, I'm talking about common sense." How is it, compatible with common sense that we're going to allow 30 days that you're going to keep pouring weapons into Ukraine, and you're giving Ukrainians a breathing room where their forces in Kursk are on the brink of rout. So what, we're going to give them a 30-day break? So these are all very reasonable points. And I think now what we know is that Witkoff, he was in Moscow yesterday. He met Putin, I think, from the reports that it was late in the evening that he finally got his meeting with Putin, and they talked for several hours. So he left, I think, in the early hours of the morning, and now he's flown out. But reports that he flew to Baku, which I don't understand. But I imagine he's going to go back to Washington and relay the conversation to Trump.
You have to be aware, everyone, that Alexander Lukashenko is making a state visit, and so Belarus is very important to Russia. So just because an American envoy shows up doesn't mean Putin is going to clear his schedule. I
Right,
mean,
that's right.
And that would have been very disrespectful to Lukashenko. So
Right.
I thought it was interesting is that Lukashenko got in on the act and kind of talking about Russia's reaction and how we look at this. I mean, again, Russians are amazingly gracious hosts, and Putin let Lukashenko
He went
in on
on
the
and on
game.
and on. I mean, he just
Yeah, he talks a lot.
he just goes on and on. And when Lukashenko does these interviews, God, he's verbose. I mean, these interviews that he gives to to various these journalists, internet influencers, like this Mario guy who's he's Elon Musk's sidekick. He gave him a long interview. I mean, he just went on and on and on. He doesn't like any interruptions. But anyway, this was the report from TASS. Putin's remarks support cautious U.S. optimism about resolving Ukraine crisis.
If that isn't diplomatic language, I don't know what it is. So
Right.
that is a very well crafted headline.
That's right. That's right. And says Russian President Vladimir Putin's statements about his strong support for the idea of a ceasefire in Ukraine reinforce Washington's cautious optimism. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said at a briefing, undoubtedly, there are reasons for cautious optimism, Peskov noted, commenting on remarks by US President National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. And you must have heard the important statement that President Putin made yesterday. He said, in response to questions from reporters, that he backed US President Donald Trump's position on the settlement. Peskov pointed out that is why, even though there's still a lot to be done, the president sided with Mr. Trump's stance. So I just want to take a look at the Waltz's interview was actually quite interesting,
I mean, with Peskov's statement, I mean, obviously that was sent to rattle the Europeans.
yeah,
Putin and Trump are, are
that's right.
basically aligning.
They're
That was a real poke at the Europeans.
right. And here's Waltz. He was being interviewed yesterday by Sean Hannity, and he was quite interesting. So let's just watch this.
Security Advisor Mike Waltz. First, let me tip my hat to you. You, Secretary of State Rubio, Steve Witkoff. I know all of you are working very hard. Tell us what happened when you were in Saudi Arabia. Let's start there.
Well, first, Sean, the Secretary General of NATO was with President Trump today in the Oval Office, and he said it perfectly. He looked at the president and said, only you, President Trump, could have broken this logjam, this quagmire that President Biden got us into, World War I style trench warfare meat grinder of men, material, national treasure. That is completely unsustainable. So in Saudi Arabia, with our great Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, we had a very different approach from the Ukrainians than you saw just a week ago with President Zelensky in the Oval Office. They were very forthcoming. We had very good conversations. At one point, we even broke out a map and started drawing on it on how we're going to end this war. And you saw as a result of the end that the Ukrainians agreed that they need to move to a ceasefire. All sides need to move to a ceasefire. We have to stop the killing, as President Trump has said over and over again, and talk about a permanent end to this peace within European-led security in terms of a permanent peace. So all of those things are underway. And again, as President Zelensky said in an initial phone call, as President Putin said on the initial phone call, and as the NATO Secretary General have said, only President Trump could have brought us from this far away. I mean, literally no sides talking, closer and closer together to end this war.
All right, let me ask you this. Russia says they're ready to discuss peace with Ukraine. Putin says he's open to a Ukraine peace deal. Putin did put out also a lot of caveats. My understanding is, I believe it's Steve Witkoff. I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it's Steve Witkoff. And that there are meetings taking place in Moscow that took place today. I'm assuming you don't want to negotiate on national television and tell us everything that happened. I respect that. But do you have a level of confidence? I understand when Putin has his caveats, he's negotiating on his end. There are things he's going to want. There are things Zelensky's going to want. And neither Zelensky or Putin are going to get everything that they want if we're going to get a deal. With all that said, are you confident we can get there?
Well, Sean, we'll see, but I'm confident if anybody could get us there, it's President Trump. You're right. I'm not going to, announce or negotiate anything on national television, certainly not ahead of the president. But we do have some cautious optimism. You saw the Ukrainians move from where we were in the Oval Office to where we were in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, with Secretary of State Rubio. And you saw President Putin's press conference today. Of course, both sides are going to have their demands. And of course, both sides are going to have to make some compromises. And the shuttle diplomacy of going back and forth is happening. I've spoken to my counterpart, Special Envoy Witkoff is out there and bringing things back for us to evaluate, for the President Trump to make decisions on next steps.
Yeah, I think, look, it's obviously very important for everybody. If I were to imagine how this deal unfolds, it's going to be the rare earth mineral deal, a component that keeps U.S. involvement and a presence in Ukraine. Maybe European troops can be in Ukraine as well. I would imagine that Ukraine being a part of NATO is not going to happen. And I would imagine parts, maybe the Donbas region in particular, or areas that are heavily populated by people from Russia, that would go to Putin in any negotiated settlement. Am I wrong in my conjecture here?
Sean, no surprise, you're not wrong in any of that. And what's important is that we are discussing all of those things with both sides. We are having those discussions with our counterparts with the Russians. We are having those discussions with our counterparts with the Ukrainians. And we are...
But not the Europeans.
...sides together.
Right. But I thought this was very interesting. I mean, because when Hannity says, so I imagine this is what's being discussed, am I wrong? He said, yeah, no, you're right.
I was surprised. Were you surprised?
I was surprised as well, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I thought it was really, really, I mean, because that's a major public open reversal of the Western position. So yeah, I mean, that's clearly what they're discussing, which means, that we made there's been a lot of progress since the end of the Biden era. Now, predictably, the response from Zelensky and the Europeans has been vituperative to what's going on. So here they have. And then Zelensky says, right now we have heard from Putin's highly predictable and manipulative words in response to the idea of a ceasefire on the front lines.
It's unfortunate, George, that there's no one on earth that can duplicate the bad accent of that guy.
The bad accent and that gravelly voice, which probably, I don't know, not sure how he, probably a lot
how
of
he
years.
does it, it will be for future scientists to determine.
Yes. Of course, Putin is afraid to tell President Trump directly that he wants to continue this war and keep killing Ukrainians. That's why in Moscow they are surrounding the ceasefire idea with such preconditions that it either fails or gets dragged out for as long as possible. Putin does this often. He doesn't say no outright, but he drags things out and makes reasonable solutions impossible. We see this as yet another round of Russian manipulation.
Oh, wow, wow. Every accusation is a confession, isn't
Yeah,
it?
that's right. And there was a US proposal for an unconditional ceasefire. We in Ukraine accepted this proposal. We have heard from an American side that there is a readiness to organize monitoring and verification, and this is absolutely feasible with American European capabilities. Yeah, that's kind of that's going to be a stumbling block. The Russians are not going to accept American and European capabilities monitoring a ceasefire since they
Well,
are
everybody, but
interested
we already
parties.
have, we've already been there, everyone. The
Exactly.
OSCE was supposed to be monitoring the ceasefire that ended the hostilities between the Kiev government and the peoples of the Donbass. We already been there, and the OSCE compromised itself in the most shameful way. No, it's not going to happen. George is right, okay?
Yeah, exactly. And during the ceasefire, to prepare answers to all questions about a long-term security and a
You're
real
getting
last.
it. You're getting it. You're getting it. You're getting it. Yeah.
Thank you. And to put a plan to end the war on the table. Ukraine is ready to work as quickly and constructively as possible. We have discussed this with the US representatives and our European partners. And then we are not setting conditions that complicate the process. Russia is. As we have said, the only one stalling, the only one being unconstructive is Russia. They need this war. Putin has stolen years of peace and continues this war day after
Oh,
day.
here we go. Oh, God. Who wrote this for him?
It does sound like him, though.
Well, I mean, you can, writers, that's part of their job is to know the voice of the person they're trying to speak for.
Right.
Somebody knows his voice, okay? But considering his level of English, he certainly didn't write this.
No, I agree. It's like the Trump tweets. I always doubt that Trump actually writes them, but they do sound like Trump. So, anyway, now is the time to increase pressure on him. Sanctions must be applied, ones that will work. We will continue working with our American and European partners and with everyone in the world who wants peace to force Russia to end this war. So there is this tone.
Does it sound like he wants to end this conflict?
It doesn't sound like it.
It doesn't sound like it to me.
No, and it's not exactly in conformity with what Mike Waltz has just been saying. Mike Waltz, oh, well, look, the Ukrainians have really made a huge amount of progress. Look where they were in that Oval Office meeting. Now, they're on the same page as we are. They're talking seriously about peace, taking these peace talks, on board. No, this is very much not what Waltz claimed.
Well, and it's also very interesting is that when you have Western media notables, they always will go, the noble Ukrainian fighters, fighting alone against the Russian horde, defending their democracy. Has everybody noticed that all of a sudden that all of that is gone from the conversation?
Right.
Thankfully, it's gone because none of that gets us anywhere. All it does is muddy the waters. And now we're talking. I mean, you have the Russian president, with his, well, what about ceasefire violations? How are we going to deal with that? Okay, and then you have the National Security Council advisor saying much more than I ever would have expected.
Exactly. Yeah, it was quite a remarkable interview. And then here's Ursula von der Leyen. Always pops up.
Yes, the first Gauleiter of Europe.
Yes, any circumstances, she's always there. The EU increases pressure on Russia. We extend our sanctions on nearly 2,400 individuals and entities over Russia's ongoing aggression against Ukraine, including travel bans, asset freezes, ban on funding resources. Our determination to support Ukraine is decisive. So here, while all this talk is taking place, she's going on sanctions. Our determination to support Ukraine is.
What did Putin say? Our partners and what?
Colleagues and partners.
Colleagues and partners. Ursula, have you got the memo yet? Have you got it yet?
I don't.
You know what this does, everyone, with this kind of bombastic language? It shows how insignificant and ever more insignificant that she's becoming. She's
Sure.
becoming a kind of a
Right.
show joke.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
And that's within the European Union
That's right.
now.
And exactly. I mean, she just this entirely predictable, shrill, harridan-like yelling, which is based on nothing. I mean, there's serious
Yeah.
negotiations taking place, and she's just, oh, sanctions. We are going ahead with sanctions.
You know, everyone, you know how Hollywood likes to reboot things? They rebooted Perry Mason, which I loved as a child, and I liked what they did. Maybe they'll continue it. They discontinued after 2 seasons. But if there was another reboot, like for example, Hogan's Heroes, Ursula von der Leyen would have a role, okay? Because she's such a caricature. Such a unidimensional, a flat character that she would just be, she'd be in a uniform with a riding crop and boots, and she'd be
Right,
barking all the time.
right.
Because when she tweets, she barks.
Yes, yes.
That's all it is. When she tweets, it's noise. There's no meaning there.
Yeah,
It's noise. And it's almost a cry for help. I'm here. I'm running the European Union, which most people don't think she is.
right.
Most people find her annoying, like I do, and like George does. But the more you do this, Ursula von der Leyen, the more you diminish yourself. If you're going to say something, say it sparingly and have meaning. You do neither.
No, I was just thinking that if they do a remake of Hogan's Heroes, she wouldn't be the commandant because he was quite a decent sort, that German commandant. She'd be the sort of Oberhauptbannführer coming in,
Yeah,
at various
what
times.
was his what was the SS officer that always showed up?
Yeah, that's the one. That she'd be that, because
She would be that, exactly. Oh, and considering our postmodern environment, they would have to cast her in that role
yes,
because she'd have to be a lady boss.
that's right,
Okay.
exactly. Lady
Okay.
Bust, exactly.
All right. I want to see in the comments later what was it was his name was Major. Ah, it was a comic like Major Schnitzel or
Yeah, that's
something
right.
like
Yeah,
that. Remember?
that's right. So yeah. He
It
was the
was
one.
Bullcarter. He was the general. General Bullcarter. Yeah.
And then
Ursula, you have a future. Okay. Talk to Barack Obama. He has an in over at Netflix. Maybe they
yes,
can reboot Hogan's Heroes
that's right.
and you can play the SS officer.
And this is the Times of London, who quotes David
Oh,
Lamb.
not this guy. Oh, George. Why are you ruining my Friday evening with David Lammy? Okay.
David Lammy has to be one of the dimmest
The
of the
dimmest,
dimmest who
dumbest
has ever
doorknobs
held that
ever to be in
position of
office.
foreign secretary. I mean, they've been dumb people as foreign secretary in the past, but he really he takes the cake. It's
Yeah.
hard to think of anyone comparable. Somebody so ignorant of the world as him is quite striking. He says here, wrong for Putin to demand truce terms. It's wrong. Apparently, it's wrong. Well,
Yeah. I mean, somebody that would have just maybe 3 or 4 more IQ points might say it's inadvisable. I mean,
yes,
you know what I mean?
yes.
But I mean, you don't come out and say these kind of, it's wrong. Okay.
But yes, David Lammy, the foreign secretary, has warned that it would be wrong for President Putin to place conditions on a Ukraine-Russia ceasefire. It's just wrong. I mean, he just simply has to accept it. Lammy, who is meeting with his G7 counterparts in Canada, that's great. This is a G7 meeting. Said there was an opportunity for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. The US and Ukraine have called for a full, immediate, and unconditional 30-day ceasefire. And then he says, this should be the first step so that talks can start on a full settlement that protects Ukraine's security and sovereignty. Well, we already heard from Mike Waltz saying, I just don't think that's on the table. President Zelensky has shown that Ukraine is the party of peace. And we read that lengthy tweet a moment ago, and, as to whether he's the party of peace. It would be wrong for Putin to lay conditions. Imagine that you're telling a leader of a country, it's wrong for you to set out conditions to make sure that you're not disadvantaged by any deal that you sign.
I love it. Let me finish it up. Our support for Ukraine and that of our partners remains ironclad. Didn't see that coming, huh?
No. Yeah. It was very strange. Lammy was the one, when he was at the United Nations, and he started talking about, well, because I have, African ancestry and my ancestors were slaves, I feel particularly strongly about Ukraine. Somehow, as if somehow Russia is to blame for his ancestors being enslaved. I mean, it was one of those things, it's so bizarre and illogical, the Russians were probably just scratching their heads. Can you explain to me how did he, what exactly is he talking about? Because it's so ridiculous. Russians were not slave traders. They were not the ones who were enslaved. Russians that were enslaved, they were the ones who were enslaved by the Turks, but they didn't enslave anyone. And he talks about how my ancestors were enslaved. That's
why they didn't enslave Africans.
No, they did not enslave
part
Africans.
Of the African slave trade.
No, they were not involved in the African slave trade. I feel personally on this. Anyway, this is the Guardian, which says G7 warn Russia of further sanctions if no ceasefire is agreed. G7 nations emphasize the need for robust security arrangements. I always wonder when the word robust appears. To ensure a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, warning Moscow to follow Kiev in agreeing ceasefire or face further sanctions. So that's their line they're taking. You better agree to this ceasefire or face further sanctions, which is very strange because ultimately it's going to be decided by Trump. And so we're not quite sure why the G7 is already making these decisions about sanctions. According to a final draft statement.
Well, George, why are they opining about this? We have already seen a train of events in progress now. We had a telephone call from the American president to the Russian president. We had an American delegation meet with a Russian delegation in Riyadh. Okay. G7, why don't you just kind of sit on your hands? You're not invited to the party. And what you do is that you undermine your major ally in the Western world by doing this. Do you think that's going to be left unnoticed? I don't think so. I think it's going to be very much noticed.
That's okay? Exactly. But they're rushing out with all these statements where they could just simply sit it out. They could just wait 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. There's no rush for them to come out with these statements. G7.
Well, they desperately want to be relevant. And if you think about what I just said, when you're desperately trying to remain irrelevant, it means you're not relevant, okay? Right. Because you wouldn't have to desperately try to be relevant, okay? Right. And see, what they're doing is they want to put their fingerprints on it. Okay, but you're putting your fingerprints on the wrong side, okay? That's right. Going to be remembered.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And then G7 members called for Russia to reciprocate by agreeing to a ceasefire on equal terms and implementing it fully. So
what does that mean?
It doesn't mean anything. Okay. It's like
what are the equal terms? Explain to me, what are the equal terms? Only one person so far this explained what the terms might be is President Vladimir Putin.
Right.
Nobody else has talked about terms.
Right. No, I think what they took that proposal. It was all it was a proposal by the Americans to say we're going to give it to the Russians. That was just simply a proposal. That way, and they took it as this kind of take it or leave it demand. Well, Russia's not going to accept a take it or leave it demand. They say, well, you're going to, that's it. Take it or leave it. And if you leave it, then, we're going to impose sanctions. Well, who are you to start talking like this? And says the draft approved by senior diplomats still needs a green light from ministers. And then, but what there was a quote that I wanted. I don't have it. It was by this new French defense minister. I think his name is Lecornu, who I think has said something like, this is fantastic. We're going to get a ceasefire within the next 24 hours, and we are ready to send our forces in to monitor the ceasefire. We're ready already to send them in within the next 24 hours. We're ready to send them. I mean, when you say something like either you're an idiot or you are desperately determined to sabotage any agreement, because there's no way in the world, and the Russians have said this over and over again, that they're not going to accept this. They're not going to accept French forces in Ukraine.
In this case, it's both. Okay, I mean, it's just so it's transparent that this is what they want, because again, this is the kind of the Borrellian view of the world, that they must be part of a solution, a solution that is unilateral and forced. No one else has any kind of agency. Only the garden people have agency.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Right.
And you're trying to extend your garden, if I can extend the metaphor here.
Right.
This is the most counterproductive way of dealing with people.
Yes.
All right. And anyone that has any kind of common sense, as George put it quite appropriately, it was a proposal. It's like, what do you think? Huh? Right. Okay. And I'll tell you what I think. And here's my reply. Right. This is being interpreted as they're so desperate. Right. The Russians are so, you better take it. Right. Don't blame me for the consequences.
Right. No, exactly.
It's absurd.
That's exactly right, because that's what they did. They did on Tuesday night. They said, "Oh, this is a take it or leave it demand." It was never that. It's a proposal. Now, Trump, who is after all, the master of the deal, knows perfectly well that when you're negotiating, okay, you put forward a proposal. Then the other side looks at it. It's a proposal is not a take it or leave it demand. He's going to look at it and say, well, I like this, I don't like that. I think, here's what I think here, and I put forward another proposal. That's how you negotiate something. They didn't do that. They said, oh, this is a take it or leave it demand, and it's up to Putin to make that call. Are you going to take it or are you going to leave it? If you take it, then we're ready to send in our forces to monitor the ceasefire. I mean, what the hell are you thinking? I mean, you're going to take it. They're going to take it, and they're going to allow NATO just to move their forces in immediately.
It's almost as if it doesn't matter if you take it or you don't take it. We're sending in our forces. That's what they imply.
That's right. That's right.
And this is not to secure peace. This is a threat to Russia.
Of course it is. So
everybody, once they get on the ground, they're going to say, this is a political fact. We are here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Once they get on the ground, then they immediately begin building the infrastructure, the NATO infrastructure. It's not just going to be, hey, here are a couple of soldiers with some handguns. They mean, hey, we've got to build a base here. Got an air base here. This is where we're going to station our anti-aircraft missiles. And then we're going to have all the different bases, and they create roads connecting these various bases. That's the point. That's going to be a NATO infrastructure. And they really believe that Russia's going to accept this, particularly when Russians have explicitly said there's no way we're going to accept NATO forces, whether they're coming under NATO auspices or not NATO auspices. We're not going to allow them to come into Ukraine. It's clearly a threat to our security. So either they are desperate just to sabotage this, to make sure that it doesn't happen, or they just lost the plot. They just have no idea what the hell's going on. They just don't even understand what the Russians are saying, or they're not interested in what the Russians are saying, because it's such a bizarre thing to say. Well, we're ready to move. The ceasefire will come within 24 hours, and we are ready to send our forces into Ukraine.
Well, it'll become even worse. At one point, I try to avoid predictions. But as we go through this process, George, just wait for Zelensky to officially invite French troops into it. That's part of their game plan, okay? Right. But he knows that'll raise the anger of the American administration. Maybe he doesn't care, or maybe he feels that he has enough allies in Western media and the political elites, where he can defy. I tend to doubt it. Okay, I think he doesn't want to be beaten again. But I don't know, George, what's your feeling looking at Waltz's comments? Um, and obviously he knows far more than he can tell in public, for obvious reasons. He said more than I ever would have
Right.
expected.
Right.
My sense, and I'm not saying I like or dislike the guy, I'm indifferent, okay? But I think he feels that there's some momentum here and he's kind of happy about it. And
Yeah, okay, yeah, yeah.
no,
I got
it
that.
just I think what I'm thinking is that a rapport has been established, and they want both sides want to say, okay,
Right.
let's see where this goes. No
Right.
rush,
Right.
no outsiders, no more noise. Common sense, common sense,
Right.
common sense.
I know that's the impression I have with him, and that's the impression I got also with Trump yesterday when he had a very long media availability with Mark Rutte was with him, and he was continually asked the journalists always asked the same question: what kind of leverage do you have with Putin? Can you trust Putin? And are you ready to impose sanctions on Russia if they don't comply? And so he said, well, I could do that, but I don't really want to do that. I don't want to talk about that. I think we're making good progress, and I think that it's very promising. So I think they seem quite positive, and that's the reason why Trump said I'm not going to talk about anything any kind of sanctions
Yeah,
or
I mean,
leverage or anything like that.
it's going to be very interesting, even though the Democrats are not in charge of either congressional body. Well, there'll be a call for a new round of funding for Ukraine. That'll be very, very interesting. From what I understand, I should have written this down, but the last tranche that was signed off 2 weeks before the end of the Biden administration, that flow is still going in. And Trump isn't going to probably do anything to do to stop it. But after that, as we're talking about, and if we ever get to a 30-day ceasefire, and that's a big if right now, that could happen in November, everyone. Okay.
Right. Now that's a very good point. I mean, I think that clearly what Putin has done is said, heck, well, here are my questions, and can you provide me some answers to these questions? But in the meantime, he's going to continue fighting, and he's got to wrap this thing up in Kursk. Now, I don't know how close are they to winning in Kursk. I mean, how close is it? I mean, Putin was clearly in that news conference. He was very oh well, things are really great, and so on. But I don't know. I mean, how close are they? Because if they can get that out of the way, then I think the other problems are a lot a lot more straightforward.
Look, when there's a conflict of this magnitude, you have what's called the fog of war.
Right.
Every interested party has their own spin that they want to purvey. And I look at the Russian side, and it looks like last legs. Okay, as some people like to say.
Right.
It looks like they've made an enormous amount of progress. What does that really mean in a objective,
Right.
30,000 feet in the air? I don't know, okay? But given the amount of detail that is being presented to the Russian public, it looks like they're in the last stages here. I think that's fair to say.
Right.
Are they mopping it up and all
Right.
that? I stay away from those words. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. Me too. But I think these negotiations could well take some time. I mean, I think
Yes, yes.
obviously they put
But
forward.
if it does take some time, that gives me hope.
That's right. That's right. Because the way things stand, this was a very long meeting with Steve Witkoff. So Witkoff's going to go to back to Washington. He's going to brief Trump. And then Trump could come back with proposals of his own, or they could have the telephone conversation. That's going to be significant, so that they're ready. But here Putin was saying, this is something I'd like to talk about with President Trump. So that could, Trump likes to do these kinds of personal calls. So that's something that could take place. So I think there is momentum towards something. Whether we actually get there or not, we don't know. But there is some momentum.
You have to wonder what kind of inverse relationship is here, because the period of time that we're in, we've seen in very short order the Europeans just short circuit themselves. I mean, George and I have been observer of European politics for a very long time. I've never seen anything like this before.
Right.
I mean, this hysterics, this juvenile hysterics coming
Right.
out of people that should know better. What their ultimate goal is. I mean, it's like a pile-on. Everyone else is doing it.
Right.
It's a fad or something like that. But
Right.
the more this goes on, the more it's going to irritate the Trump
Right.
administration.
Right.
I mean, if you want to talk about a crisis in the transatlantic alliance, it's the Europeans are going out of their way to denigrate it, okay?
Right. Right.
Because at the end of the day, the Americans don't care what the Europeans think on just about anything.
No, I think yeah, that's right. But it's also interesting that the certain dynamics there within Europe, the French for some reason are taking this very belligerent stance. I mean, saying we're ready to send our forces in. But I didn't notice whether Keir Starmer was ready. Because Starmer is also ready to put, he's put boots on the ground, planes in the air. But I need the American backstop. So I mean, the French are just simply saying, yeah, we're ready to just to go in.
Well,
we don't need to wait for the Americans.
Yeah, but they border on the Atlantic, right, George?
Yes.
I mean, if Macron thinks, and maybe he does, that this is the only thing that's going to save his legacy, he must be completely out of his mind. Because his domestic legacy, it's already been written.
Right.
Ultimate, utter failure, tatters, okay?
Right.
This guy is done, okay? And any kind of parliamentary maneuvers that he was hoping for are done, okay? And so he's going to be Europe's new Napoleon or something. I mean, this is just outrageous, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, nobody in the European elite. This is like the result of incest. What happens with neoliberal ideology? It's incestuous. Okay, you only are around people exactly like you. Okay,
Right.
and you start cross-fertilizing, and you get yourself dumber and dumber and dumber. Okay, and this is what we have happened. There's nobody, with the exception of Viktor Orban and Fico. Which I wouldn't think that they're part of the breeding of the neoliberal ideology. They're looking at these two Europeans are looking at the rest of them. You really must be the outcome of DNA short circuiting, because this is just absolutely absurd. I mean, and everything and anything and everything they say, they can't back up with anything. It's just words. This whole project was a narrative never based in reality, and now they're on this narrative on steroids now.
Right. The incestuous quality of it is always very interesting, because they're always meeting. There's always some kind of a meeting. It's a G7.
I think there should be some supervision.
That's right. And there's, Ursula always there, and there's an EU Council meeting, and then the EU foreign ministers meeting, and then the G7 foreign ministers, and then an EU defense ministers meeting, and then the finance minister. They're always meeting. And so it's like, it's like they never talk to anyone else other than themselves. I mean, it's like you have this small circle. I think we talked about this. Like, this is like a sitcom, where you have this same basic 10 characters, and and you have these different permutations among the 10 characters. And that's why they have this strange view of the world. And why would they have other than precisely because they never see anything of the world other than one another.
And the entire time you have this canned laughter going on. It's completely generated and fake. Okay. And what essentially, I've already brought up Hogan's Heroes, but this is a reality show. It should be called Hogan's Heroes. Okay. This is reality TV, not based in facts or anything like that. We have all these odd characters that never would have succeeded in anything in life. That's why they got into politics. Okay. That happens very often. They're completely skillless people.
Right. I think that's a really
Annalena Baerbock with her thin lips and beady eyes. I mean, no wonder she got into politics, okay?
yeah,
Could you see her in like human services, human resources? No.
yeah, I think you've got a really good idea there for a reality TV show. Let's base a reality TV show, put it to them, about these people. We install a camera and we just always follow them around. I think it'll be a really good television. I think it's good. There's a lot of money to be had. I think you should
Well, you know who
propose
could
that
be,
to Barack Obama. I want to do a reality TV show based on the Brussels set.
yeah, well, see, but Barack Obama can get the money, but he can't be involved any more than that. I can tell you who the executive producer could be. It could be Zelensky. He needs something in the future. He's already done it for his own country, okay? And he just said, no, I'm going to take it on a continental scale, okay?
Right.
I know all these people. They love me.
I think there's a lot, yeah, a lot of money to be had here. But I was thinking, because when you said whether Zelensky would just simply call in the peacekeepers, I can see him, extending an invitation to France, and Macron just saying, yeah, right, we're gonna send them. The British aren't going to do it. The Italians aren't going to do it. The Poles aren't going to do it. Maybe some of the Balts, they'll send 2 or 3 people in. But I can see that
Well,
Macron deciding that's it, we're going to do it.
but I think the French chief of staff, they will have one demand. They will tell Macron, we will get you a very effeminate uniform, but you have to go too. Okay? You can lead. Okay, we'll give you a toy gun. All right. I mean, I personally, George, I don't think the French military would agree to it. I just think they'd say
I do have doubts,
I think
but
they'd say no. I mean, if there's going to be like an officers' quarters inside a building in the center of Kiev, the officers' club, okay. But do you think grunts are going to go there? I think they all know enough about this, and actually. There have been a number of French mercenaries that have gone there and been killed, and it's been big news. It's been big news in France. Okay,
right.
I just again, saying things and then expecting them to be done, it's such division right now. Macron should be very careful. I'm not really sure the French military would go along with something like that. Okay.
Yeah, I like you. I doubt it, but I don't know how extensive the lunacy is. I mean, there's been so much lunacy in Europe that you just don't know to what extent people have just sort of bought into this ridiculous nonsense. I mean, everything, this whole Ukraine caper has been besotted by complete lunacy.
But George, think of the logic here, and I'm trying to be respectful and gracious towards the French president here. Keep this in mind, Emmanuel. A little bit of history. French troops went to Russia once. And you know what happened? Russian troops came to France.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Keep that in mind.
I was kind of
maybe don't go.
I'm kind of reminded of remember Woody Allen's film Love and Death, about the Napoleonic Wars, and the Russians were saying, imagine, if we were conquered by France, we'd have to eat croissant for breakfast every morning.
Well, we've been over the Woody Allen motif here. I'm not a big fan. Some films, yes.
I'm not either. I like that film, but I'm not a huge fan. Yeah.
Okay.
You go on.
I don't read. There's nothing like to derail your thoughts when you mention Woody Allen. Okay. So, no, this whole last few weeks have been extremely torn, and George and I have kind of let our hair down, what little I have of it, because I want this whole discussion about Ukraine ever since the start of the special military operation, and I think that I'm a victim of it as well. This is an admission. We always have to separate what we want and what can be.
Exactly.
Okay. And I think so many people in this conversation start erring on the side of what they want.
What they want, and then they assume that that's true. Absolutely right. Yeah.
Well, but what you want, and then you build a case backwards. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
And
That's the big
there
problem.
some people over there at Responsible Statecraft. I read a couple things. I think you know what I'm talking about. You're wishing too much.
That's right. Now there's an awful lot of that, and especially in the alt media, that people just what they want to happen, they assume is going to happen. You absolutely cannot do that. So at the moment, I think there are interesting, hopeful signs. I think we're a long way from anyway, but nonetheless, they are hopeful, as we I think predicted on Wednesday. There wouldn't be a flat out rejection by the Russians. There would be, they would come back with questions, queries, concerns of their own, and then essentially put it back in the American court. If you're serious about this, then you need to address our concerns. I mean, and I think that the Americans don't have to. Otherwise, you're just posturing.
Yeah, and we don't want to think too far ahead because we're at the start of the start. But any meaningful commitment to a ceasefire would have to entail next steps. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the predicate for something more. Yeah. We have to be wide-eyed about that. The Trump administration has to be wide-eyed about that. Okay. Cut off all the noise from Europe. It's just annoying. Okay. It's unhelpful, extremely unhelpful. I think that, looking at how the Russians have dealt with this, and, every time, over the last 3 years, particularly every time the Kremlin has come out with a statement or one of Putin's long speeches and stuff like that, we take it apart and we look at what they want. We have a really, really, really good idea what the Russians want. And are those maximalist positions? Maybe, probably. Okay. Would some form of compromise be possible? Maybe, perhaps. Okay, whatever that compromise means to them. Okay, we don't see that coming out of the Trump administration yet. I'm going to be generous, be gracious.
Right.
Okay?
But no, I think it's so. But I think what we heard from Mike Waltz.
There's a lot. Everybody, you have no idea how much he admitted.
He admitted that so the United States has moved a long way, and this is why the European position is just so ridiculous, because it's like they're still stuck in the mindset of the Biden administration. I mean, no one's told them that's gone. That just repeating this or the slogans of the Biden years is just inappropriate. That's it. That's not what the new administration is about. They want to bring this war to an end. They might not succeed. The odds are the odds are strong that they won't succeed. But clearly, just repeating this, we're going to stick with Ukraine. Sovereignty, territorial integrity. We need security guarantees. I mean, just repeating this, it's not doing any good, because that's not what the Americans are talking about now, and that's just that's not where the negotiations are heading right now. So that's why I had those quotes from the Europeans of just how totally irrelevant they are. David Lammy, the foreign secretary, what kind of nonsense is he talking here?
Can you think of a worse time to have someone like him around? Can you think of a worse time than to have having Annalena Baerbock? Can you think of a worse time? Okay. It just is so befuddling how because there's that famous saying or question, great history makes great men, or great men make great history. It's a nice thing. It's have some beer or wine and you can talk about it. Okay, it's a fun philosophical thing. But at this time, the leadership in Europe is amazing. George, we didn't talk about. We should real quickly review Mark Rutte's visit to the White House. Okay,
right. Well, that was itself quite interesting, because it was almost like a love fest.
Did you see the body language?
That's right, exactly.
I was waiting for Rutte to get on his knees and start licking his Trump's toes.
That's right, exactly. So it was a love fest. And Rutte said, well, you did more for NATO than any other president. You got all this money from NATO member states. That's a slobbering. And then Trump in return said, "Well, you're the fantastic Secretary General, and I went into bat for you. And there were some other candidates. I didn't care much for them, but I wanted you in there." So it's kind of an interesting issue, because again, the Europeans who will say somehow, "Well, we're going to head towards a war economy. We're going to spend all this money on our military, and that'll show Trump." But that's again, Trump is so happy. Great, pour all this money into NATO. I mean, that's exactly what Trump has been asking for. So it's kind of interesting that somehow, what is the upshot of all of this transatlantic rift and all this squabbling? You have this love fest between Rutte and Trump.
Well, I'm just waiting. Is Mark Rutte an agent of the Kremlin? Okay, they flipped him. He's part of it. He's part of the conspiracy right now. Okay, no, he didn't. Look, did Mark Rutte score any points with the European elites? Of course not. Did he score a point with Trump? Yeah. That's what counts, everybody. That's what counts.
That's what counts.
That's what counts.
Rutte knows perfectly well.
Yep.
That the only thing, you can't have NATO without the United States. That's all that matters is the United States. And since Trump is in the business of getting as much money into NATO as possible, he's been, threatening, bullying, cajoling the Europeans to cough up more money. And now they're promising they're going to, really, really going to cough up more money. It says, "Great. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for all that you have done for NATO." So, yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing. So, the Europeans who think that somehow they're sticking a thumb in Trump's eye by putting in more money into NATO, they're just simply playing Trump's game.
Well, yeah. So you have Stammer, you have Macron. They think that they can influence and manipulate Trump. I mean, they're somehow senior statesmen. I mean, that's laughable on its face. And it had no impact whatsoever, absolutely none. And then Mark Rutte shows up and he says what Trump wants. Trump's going to say, "Have him back. We like this guy."
That's right. Yes. Yes.
Because the Europeans allowed this power dynamic to develop over 80 years. Yeah. We all saw it coming. We all saw it coming. And there's a long literature about this. There's nothing new about this. And George knows this as well as I do. But what if the Americans change their mind?
Right.
They've been talking about this for decades.
But decades. But it's not going to happen, because it serves both sides so well. I mean, we have these transatlantic rifts, these storms in a teacup, and we've had so many of them over the years. We don't have to list all of them. But they're always settled because it works very well for both sides. The Europeans have no intention of taking their defense seriously. It's going to mess up their way of life. And the Americans like, the setup whereby the Europeans do as they're told. And that's always been like that with NATO. The Europeans have to do as they're told. And occasionally the Europeans get, nervous. "Oh, God, well, are you really going to, blow up New York and Boston for Bonn and Dusseldorf? The guarantees are not credible." And the Americans said, yes. Well, all right, we'll station some missiles here. Are they credible now? Yes, thank you. So this is a regular thing.
I'll compromise a little bit with here. I think that the American relationship with NATO is evolving. It's not coming to an end. I agree with Georgia on that point, but I think it is changing. And what we're seeing is, and we mentioned this on Wednesday, is that Europe does still have elections, at least if they don't continue to cancel them like in Romania, and they just might, okay? But you have parties and politicians that are embracing Trump's view of the world. And that for Europe, for the best of Europe, we have to embrace Donald Trump. We're going to see this start taking a life on its own here, and I think it's going to have an impact, because a lot of voters, and George and I've talked about this endlessly, is that at least in 2025 you can have your coveted welfare state, or you can have a war state. Tell me which one you want, everybody. Okay. Right. And I think the interrelationships of NATO will evolve. I think there's going to be a major awakening at some point, but I don't think it's going to be the end of it. I mean, I would, again, like going back to what I said a few minutes ago, I would like to see NATO come to it. I would very much like it to.
Sure.
Do I think it's possible in the anytime soon? No, I don't think so because of what George just said. It
Right.
works for both sides.
That's right. That's right. And really, the crucial moment was 1991. 1991, that was the moment when really it looked like NATO had, what are we going to do now? I mean, we got this military alliance and we're supposedly defending us from the Soviet Union. Well, there's no Soviet Union anymore. Maybe, who knows? Do you think we should dissolve NATO? I mean, there's no place. And given that it didn't happen then, didn't they? They said, no, we don't want to dissolve it. No. We got to find new roles. We got to find, we have to sit down and think about new missions for NATO because we have to keep it going. So if it didn't dissolve then in 1991, when it's raison d'etre, we're defending us from this terrifying Soviet Union, when its raison d'etre disappeared, it's just not going to, it just serves both sides too well for anyone. I mean, even somebody like Viktor Orban, he has never proposed leaving NATO. I mean, even Fitz or anyone else. I mean, they don't like the Ukraine policy, but they wouldn't dream of ditching NATO. So it's just.
Well, I mean, again, I think this goes back to something I've said many times before. I lived in Poland in the 1980s and the 1990s, and there was this big fever pitch about NATO membership and EU. Yeah, and the EU will be rich like the Germans. Okay, that's what we want. Okay, and I said, well, there's a lot of strings attached, and you're not going to like some of those strings. Okay, you might become more affluent. And then with NATO, I said, well, and this I had people that would swear at me. I'd say, so you're going to go from the Warsaw Pact to NATO, okay? And that's what's happened.
That's what happened.
But there was always that kind of built-in assumption, George, is that, well, if we become a part of NATO, we'll never be in a war. That's how they used to think about it.
That's fair. And it's exactly right, and that's exactly what they should be thinking. But just that, hey, how has NATO provided us with any kind of security? We go from one war after another, but that hasn't seeped in. That just hasn't seeped in to the European electorates.
Well, or maybe
they stick with NATO because hey. Essentially, it's a way. It's a freebie for us. It's a freebie. The Americans will just take care of us,
meaning
we don't. Yeah.
Meaning we won't get into war. The Americans will take care of it for us.
Exactly. The Americans will take care of us, and that's why every few years the French come along. European security. We're going to extend our nuclear umbrella. I mean, that's not new. I mean, the French have talked about this before. No one wants it. No one trusts the French. No one believes that the French.
And no one wants the Germans to have it.
No one wants the Germans to have it. No one believes the British are anything other than the Americans' Trojan horse in Europe. So no one's going to trust the British. So by default, it goes back to the United States. But of course, the United States extracts a price, which is complete subordination to us. I mean
and buy our arms.
Buy our arms, and we don't really like you undermining our economy. I mean the tariffs and everything else that Trump is now talking about. Yeah, and we don't like this. We're sick to death of running these trade deficits with you. I mean, why are we running a trade deficit? I mean, with you. I mean, you're rich countries. We're a rich country. We shouldn't be running a trade deficit. So, but. The Americans will get their way. I mean, they always get their way in the end. This is not one of those transatlantic spats, and I think
but also what it means, and this is the come to Jesus moment, and we're not close there, but we will, given the train of logic that George and I have just presented, is they're going to have a rapprochement with Russia at some point in time. That's if the current paradigm is to continue, that's what they're going to have to do. Okay, because you can't have other NATO members at odds with the policy priorities, imperatives of the American administration. George is right. We have these tensions every. Intermediate missiles in Germany. Remember that, okay? We've seen this go on and on. But if it is going to maintain itself in whatever form, they will have to buckle. And
Oh,
George and I will be very happy to observe it. Okay.
right.
We'll be happy to watch it. And it will turn into a domestic political issue in each one of these NATO countries. Okay. Who's going to be the first to say, we have to go back to reason? We have to sober up. Who's going to be the first to say it? Okay.
Right, right.
And it's going to have traction. We've seen it in Romania. That's why they canceled the election. Can you suppress that forever? I tend to doubt it. Okay. Because then you suppress the entire idea of democracy, and that's one of your selling points, the Borrellian world of the garden. Okay,
Right.
I mean, there's so many contradictions coming into play right now, and because it's so on its face, so obviously contradictory, and without any common sense. Somebody's going to break the spell. It's going to happen.
Well, I don't know.
It doesn't. No. It doesn't mean Russia is a good guy and we like the
Right,
Russians and all that. But I think being on a war footing, I
No,
think
that
that's
makes
going to be a
sense.
major
That
rethink.
makes
Okay,
that makes sense.
on that point. Okay.
No,
Oh, we hate the Russians. They're barbarians, but we're not afraid of them. Yeah, I'm not going to go. I
Right.
see what you mean.
No, that's right. But I just tend to think that, ultimately, these transatlantic rifts are always resolved because it just suits both sides so well. So now the issue of Russian energy is very interesting, because if, a few years down the road, the Europeans start thinking, hey, well, there's all this great energy in Russia, and we said no to, maybe start importing this energy. Well, then the Americans are going to go back to saying, well, we don't like you importing energy from Russia. We don't like you forging any kind of economic union with Russia. And then we'll have that dynamic, go back to what we situation had
Again,
a few decades ago. So it's a
cyclical.
perpetual, exactly, it's a perpetual cycle.
You can date with a chaperone, but never think about marriage, ever.
Exactly. So it just so happens that this where we are now in this cycle is a very peculiar one, whereby it's the Americans who want to improve relations with Russia, and the Europeans are just, with rage, like your dogs, they're foaming at the mouth. They want to attack Russia. That's an unusual situation, but I would imagine we're going to go back to the other situation that, they want the cheap energy from Russia, and then the Americans will say, hey, we don't like any kind of
but the Europeans,
union on this continent.
The more insightful ones will say, we can't win.
Right.
We can never win.
Right. Look, it's a ridiculous alliance. I mean, the transatlantic alliance should have dissolved long time ago. I mean, even
we wouldn't have
the glory days of the Cold War, it never really made a great deal of sense. But after 1991, it made no sense. And other than there were powerful interests that wanted to keep it going, and they prevailed.
Okay, two things before we go, and I don't want to forget. One thing is that if NATO had dissolved in 1991, we wouldn't have a war in Ukraine today.
No question. I absolutely agree. Absolutely.
Okay. And I just forgot my second point. Okay, shit. Oh. Okay. Anyway, I'm sure it'll come up in another podcast. But everyone, cautiously optimistic. Yep. Is that a fair way, George?
Cautious optimism. That's it. Exactly. That's the way Trump described it, Waltz described it, and the Russians described it.
Oh, I know my second point. Okay. Sorry. It's not very artful of me to start signing off and then remember. George, one of the arguments, I remember when Stephen Cohen was still alive, he did a debate, and one of the NATO characters, front persons for NATO, said, if the United States withdraws from NATO, European countries could start fighting each other again. What do you think of that proposition?
I don't think so.
I agree.
I don't see it. I just think that the conditions under which those wars took place are just simply not there anymore. I mean, I think there've been huge population movements. So you have more or less homogeneous states now in Europe that you didn't have before. So there aren't really those rifts to exploit that Germany's exploited very cleverly in between the wars. So I don't see what there would be to fight about. I really don't think Hungary and Romania are going to go to war over Transylvania. It's just, that moment has passed. I don't think Hungary and Slovakia are going to go to war. Oh, look, all these Hungarians who are living there. So I think that's just it's a kind of a cliche again presented by NATO to justify their own existence. And it was very interesting because, I mean, it's a slightly different topic, but Trump was asked that, well, do you think, that would, if Putin gets what he wants in Ukraine, or if there's a peace settlement in Ukraine, Putin is going to turn his ire against Europe after that. And Trump flatly ruled it out. No, I don't believe it at all. Yeah. It's just, it's not going to happen. And I think the same way.
Somebody should slip it into Trump's breast pocket. If the Russians after 3 years are still fighting in the Donbass, I don't think they're going to be in the outskirts of Paris anytime soon.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was very, very good that he just said it absolutely categorically. Just no, I don't think.
Yeah, but see, isn't it really interesting, George? We've seen this, particularly when it comes to Trump, is that the media is so hawkish. So it always, the war fever comes from the media.
Yeah, that's exactly. But just going back to your question, I really just don't see it. I don't see any reason why the Europeans would go to war or any time in the near future. I mean, who knows what happens in 100 years' time? But the idea that if you dissolve NATO, then 5 years' time they're all going to be
dissolve NATO and Germany will covet Kaliningrad.
Kaliningrad, exactly. I mean, no one else does it. I mean, it's like they don't do it anywhere else. They don't do it in Latin America. They don't do it in Asia. Why would the Europeans, meet? Slovenia. I got to go have a go at Slovenia. I can't let it go.
But the straitjacket called the EU is a barrier also to that.
Right,
okay,
right.
So no, the reason why I wanted to mention it is that they always have another reason, a more extreme reason.
Yeah.
Okay,
that's
Europe will be plunged into war if we don't stay there.
Right. But in fact, it's just as you say. It's the reverse. The continued existence and expansion of NATO, that guarantees war. So the other one, we can speculate and argue, well, maybe whatever. In this case, there's no need to speculate. We know for a fact, we know from countless examples, Georgia, Ukraine, Libya, Yugoslavia, that's, since 1991, it was NATO, then NATO's continued existence that caused these wars. So that we know for certain. And if NATO will continue on for the coming decade, there'll be more conflicts. It's just built into NATO that is going to because it's an expansionary alliance. It's a hostile. It's aggressive. It's driven by an ideology. It constantly needs enemies in order to justify itself. It will come into conflict and come into wars.
And what I'd like to. I don't want to flat-foot you, sandbag you right now, but on Sunday, I think you need to walk us through what's going in Bosnia-Herzegovina, because we haven't talked about it for a while, and there's a lot going on there.
Right.
And George is one of the preeminent experts on it, so I will pick your brain because I've been following it all through the last couple of weeks, and because so much is on our plate, we haven't been able to revisit that. I think we need to.
Yeah, absolutely right. Exactly. There's a lot going on there. Yeah.
All right, everybody, this is our Friday wrap. A lot going on. It's like we started out, I mean, the weeks go by quickly, but then when we focus on each utterance, it makes the time pass even slower. It's a very peculiar time, okay?
Yeah. They're very long weeks. It's like, it's like, wow, it's just, it's like almost something is ancient history, it's like the February the 12th call between Trump and Putin, it just seems, wow, that was several years ago, no? So
yeah. All right, everybody, we're going to keep our eye on all of these things and much more. This is The Goggle with Peter and George. We're on Locals, so please go to thegoggle.locals.com. This is Friday. As I said, we'll reconvene on Sunday. And then by the grace of God, I will do a Hail Mary before we'll try to do a live stream on Monday. We just Mr. Rumble just wouldn't let it happen.
Right. But apparently they told me there'd been some kind of an attack. I don't know. There was an attack on Twitter on Monday. That may have affected what happened on Rumble, but that's what Rumble explained to me because I complained and they said, oh, we had problems. We came under attack. So it wasn't our fault. So
Well, I could be paranoid and say we were attacked, but I'll leave it at that.
So, these dogs, they're always causing problems. And, they've been looking at the tip jar, as usual, blaming me and talking about the need to address the problem at its roots. They're very much into the root
There's
cause.
a tip jar gap.
That's right. The tip jar, the root cause of the problem, is me. Why there isn't the tip jar isn't filling up as it should be. So if you have a few bob in your pocket, whip them out, dunk them in there. If you've got any coins anywhere at all, just dump it all into the tip jar. I mean, there's no point in arguing with these dogs. So we're very grateful for all of your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve on the technology. And above all, we're going to be able to calm these dogs down a little bit, because I can see this is the storm clouds are gathering over Europe. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.